Hey, Corey.
Hey, what's going on?
Too much, man. Dig in the background.
Why, thank you. Yes, this was the COVID project was to make the boyhood dream office that I always had, and um,
Nice.
recently have my first house, and my fiance gave me full reign over one room, and
Yep.
this is what it turned into. But thanks for coming on today, man. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. That's a pleasure.
Awesome. How have things been since NFT Expoverse? Good.
Busy, kind of the
Hectic.
the nose is to the grindstone enough these days that the grindstones run away when they see me coming.
No, yeah.
Let me
Uh,
ask you, because I've got two versions of my picture on here, and one of them is portrait, the other one's landscape, which is something I've never seen before. Are you doing that?
I am, yeah. So basically, so we're live streaming on YouTube right now.
Right.
So in order to like capture it in a
In a letterbox, you
interview,
portrait both. I like that because the portrait is great. It looks a lot better than the landscape does on my house because it's so far back into the depth of field there.
yeah. So this is it. But man, thank you so much for stopping by and chatting today. We have been waiting on this conversation because it is one that is, um, often it's like unless there's an expert talking on it, it's really just kind of almost like mythical, I think, in
Hmm.
nature of like what is going on. But you gave an amazing talk at NFT Expoverse, and one that was probably one of my favorite sessions to sit through. And yeah, glad to have you on today, but really wanted to talk, kind of around some of those things that you were going through
Hmm.
in your session there, and this idea that for a lot of businesses, the idea of having some clarity on what the regulation and stuff is very critical before they move into the Web3 space.
Right.
So I mean, think maybe like quickly to start, if you just want to give a quick intro to
Sure.
yourself, we can go from there.
Sure. My name is Josh Lawler. Um, I'm always tempted to do the Elmer J. Fudd thing within the year to mansion a yacht. We'll let that go. My name is Josh Lawler. I am a partner at the law firm Zuber Lawler, where I lead our transactional practice in general and our new business and technologies division as well. I have extreme specialty, particularly in distributed ledger technology. I come out of a securities law background, so that's kind of how I approached that initially. But also, I and our firm have some rather extreme intellectual property abilities as well as a lot of international experience. So I like to think of it as being able to really see from a 30,000 foot view kind of the global footprint of the technology kind of as it expands and to try to help those in our country where we are licensed
Mm-hmm.
to navigate the waters in a way that you actually are able to get innovative and deserving business models out there, and hopefully we don't assist anybody who's got anything that's less savory.
Mm-hmm. The nefarious actors out there, right?
Various actors, bad actors.
Yeah. So when we look at this, right, and this is one of the things I found, the an interesting insights that you had, as the SEC recently, right, has made some crackdowns. That came at Coinbase, came at OpenSea. They're finally, I think, taking some action
Mm-hmm.
on it. Like, what in your mind, what's some of the news from them? Like, what's some of the newest from the SEC as far as like revelations that they've given that are
Sure.
helpful?
Yeah, so we're at interesting times right now. And to answer your question, I have to take a slight step back and point out that there's been legislation introduced in Congress that would take a lot of the jurisdiction over distributed ledger tech digital assets and stick it with the CFTC instead of the SEC. And the SEC, I think, has certainly taken notice of that, and the various criticisms about not providing guidance and legislating by enforcement, and certain Congress people have pointed to things like, well, yeah, you just fined BlockFi $100 million, but weren't they calling you to ask if they could do the things that you busted them for, and you guys weren't getting back to them? And it's a legitimate kind of concern. And again, it's understanding in terms of the SEC recognizing that the law that they've got to work with is very much imperfect to the task, and if you kind of peek behind the curtains, none of it made any sense,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't. And I could point to a bunch of little oxymoronic things. Now, this is a lead up to what's actually happening now, which is a little scary, honestly, which is, in context of Coinbase, Coinbase, this is an insider trading case. They're not going after Coinbase. They're going after a couple of people who worked at Coinbase for front running announcements. And front running announcements, if these were securities, would likely be insider trading. And it's bad and it's not fair. Whether these are securities or not, it's bad and it's not fair. We shouldn't have people front running other orders. We shouldn't have people using inside information when you've got something in the public market. So that standard is the right standard. What the SEC is trying to do is actually what they should be trying to do. The catch is that to get there, they're making some serious jurisdictional assumptions that are actually really, in my mind, very dangerous. They have basically said, well, with respect to these 9 tokens, these are securities. And, we're not really looking, they didn't say this in so many words, but the effect is we're not really looking at the Howey test anymore to see whether these are securities. We're looking at the general nature of what's going on. And the general nature of what's going on is insider trading. If these were securities, this would be bad. We're going after it. Now, interestingly, by not going after Coinbase, not going after these token projects, they're leaving the defense of whether these are securities or not to the guys who are being accused of insider trading. And this is kind of a classic bad facts, bad law. A court will go out of its way to punish somebody who's being accused of insider trading. It will find jurisdiction to allow that to happen. And we've got history of this, not to bore everybody with legal precedent, but there's a case called Tomahawk that was a fraud case, which is how we have that under the Howey test, the investment can be virtually anything. It doesn't have to be money, and it can be almost valueless. In that case, it was about bounties and people searching for bounties for token purchasers. And, the SEC found that was enough of an investment. Why? Because it was a fraud case.
Right.
And the court wants to hold fraudsters accountable. So now we've got the SEC with an insider trading case with a defendant that probably should be a defendant for something or other. And we'll see what happens. But it's scary because this is precedent that could conceivably really just dump Howey altogether. And then at that point, in my mind, you've got constitutional arguments about due process of law if you're holding somebody accountable for something criminal without actually providing, written statutes that allow you to do that. But, those are not arguments you want to be in ever in any context.
Right. So you mentioned the CFTC taking over from the SEC. I mean, so, and this, I don't know how any of it works, but like, does the SEC not want the CFT to take, like, is it a little like competitive thing? Like, no, we want to like keep doing this.
So, I mean, I'm not an expert on kind of the interplay between the federal administrative bodies either. So, I can best guess it, but this is specifically best guessing it. I mean, I think that there's always, a little bit of a competition for jurisdiction. There's obviously budgeting that goes into it. If this were to, go to the CFTC beyond just asset-backed tokens, then, the CFTC is going to have to do a lot of retooling to actually be able to govern effectively. And that's going to require additional budget and hiring people and everything else. Meanwhile, the SEC gets smaller because it's no longer got that. So, I mean, there's probably something there. Although, I mean, I think both bodies, I think I'm a trusting person. So I think both bodies are just kind of, again, trying to do the right thing. Nobody necessarily agrees on what the micro is on that, but as far as the macro goes, let's prevent fraud. Let's maintain orderly markets. All that kind of stuff.
Right.
So the CFTC doesn't have a lot of experience with those types of things. It's SEC world.
Yeah.
But the SEC doesn't really have jurisdiction over assets or commodities that are not securities, and pretty much everything is a commodity. So, you're in this tweener spot in terms of who's best positioned. And, my own personal take is nobody is well positioned. I kind of like the FTC in some ways. I can say that the SEC has made some noises with the industry about trying to come up with, appropriate disclosure requirements for tokens that maybe have use cases and other things of that nature that, show that they're definitely focusing now on the fact that, okay, well, maybe not everything is exactly like the orange groves and Howey, which is kind of their original statement. And, that's progress, but, bringing it back to kind of your listeners' likely take on this, if all this sounds confusing and completely unnavigable, that's because it kind of is.
Yeah, right,
Uh,
right, right.
it's kind of like, what are your choices? Well, you can do nothing, ignore the new technology exists, sit there and, let opportunities slide by you, which, I think probably is not what the people listening to this podcast are looking to do. You can try to move forward and comply with regulations that are, somewhat impossible to figure out, and also just really make no sense in context of kind of the underlying standards that they're supposed to be enforcing. Um, or you can, do things outside the country. None of those are great options. I don't have a great fix.
Yeah, got you. Yeah, and so like so when you look at the nine coins that they did look at and said that these are securities, I mean, what made them different, or what did the SEC find that was like, oh wow, these are securities versus not?
So I haven't deep dived it, and I don't think that the SEC actually made a statement about that. And I wouldn't expect them to have, because they probably want to be able to go after the other 100 or so that Coinbase lists. So,
Gotcha.
it's standard kind of SEC behavior so far. We're not going to tell you anything that you can use that you might use to kind of get around what we're trying to do. I think that that's what they're scared of.
Mm-hmm.
Is, if they put the guidance out there, then, all the Josh Lawlers of the world and all of their clients of the Josh Lawlers of the world are going to look at it and they're going to go, okay, well, here's what I can do to avoid whatever that was. And
Right.
they are, again, I think rightly trying to preserve this standard of, preserve early markets, protect the Main Street investor. And, that doesn't include innovating. They've apparently decided the best way to maintain those protections is, through scare tactics to try to
Mm-hmm.
keep anybody from even coming close.
Yeah, and because I've heard people mention it before, right? This idea of that if the SEC does put out a rule, then it unleashes the floodgates for everyone to see how close you can walk that line, or
Yeah.
you know maneuver around it, and
Yeah.
that's
Oh, well, it's happened.
yeah.
If you look at the history here, you know, before the 2017 Dow report was published, which is where the Howey test was put out there as the thing to judge. The SEC was looking at all these ICOs,
Mm-hmm.
and it absolutely communicated to some law firms and said, okay, well, that's a security. And the response from some very clever lawyers was, no, it's a utility. Now, right there, you run into the crux of the problem, which is that we've never had a situation where you've got a financial product that's both a financial product and it has a separate use case at the same time.
Right.
But nonetheless, these lawyers kind of got there and were like, okay, well, we're not promising anybody, shares of stock or returns of any kind. This was all value proposition based on supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the SEC came out and really applied Howey and said, well, no, that value is only going to rise in value if the project does well. And that's based on your efforts and all the other kind of stuff. And that's how we got to Howey.
Oh, I see.
And,
Okay.
you know, and they're not wrong. I mean, that's why people like me are pissed off about not having guidance.
Right.
As soon as we have guidance, we're like, okay, well, how do we do this legally?
Yeah.
And, because of the fact that there's no comprehensive, well thought out set of statutes,
Mm-hmm.
there's just going to be gaps.
Yeah.
And there's people like me that are going to be like, okay, well, our client's allowed to do X, then do that. And then it gets back to kind of what I was talking about previously, which is we want people to still be good actors.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do it.
Fair. I mean, so when
Right.
you're like, so if you were, so when you talk to, and you mentioned it some in your session, but like, when you're talking or advising, a large business or company that's wanting to move into the space, like obviously for them, it's a risk, right? Like with that idea of unregulation. I mean, so what are some things you recommend to them? Like, here's what you should do to avoid
So
getting into a bad spot.
the first thing is to erase the idea that all tokens are any one thing, or that all digital assets are the same.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is actually the biggest thing holding everybody back. It's like, oh well, tokens are securities.
Right.
Oh, no, not at all. Tokens are bookmarks,
Hmm.
effectively. Understand the technology. If you're, an existing business and you're not raising capital, you're halfway home to being able to work with the blockchain in a meaningful way that shouldn't attract any issues because, number one with a bullet for all of these projects is, are you selling it as an investment to somebody?
Right.
And that's what's got the SEC so up in arms is because there's this now idea that we're selling things that we're saying are not investments, but nod wink, everybody's buying it because they're speculating and think it's going to go up in value. And that's a very big problem for them. So, we get that. So if you're an existing business and you're looking to, put steps into, either blockchain technology in context of things like supply chain, or you're looking to, expand into kind of an NFT product line with, some existing product that you have or content that you have. And I mean, this is Nike and Louis Vuitton and Hermes. I mean, they're all doing that. Um, that's not as hard
Hmm.
uh, by any stretch. I mean, creating, for instance, an NFT that authenticates a real world asset as being authentic. Your Hermes bag is actually a real Birkin bag.
Hmm.
Um, that's not going to trigger a securities problem.
Right.
It's just not unless you work really hard to make it. By the way, because
Right.
it's
Right.
all creative, but those things aren't as big a deal. If you are doing an NFT project that does not have a real world asset anchoring it, so maybe you've got content, you've got animated characters that are interesting, basically the Bored Ape kind of scenario,
Right.
you got to be a lot more careful.
Sure.
Uh, and you're walking in the gray spaces here that that I have so much fun playing in, quite honestly. But you're walking in the gray spaces where you're back in my mind at that do the right thing piece of it. You know, Bored Ape is a good example because on the one hand, it's Bored Ape and they handed away supposedly intellectual property rights with the particular Bored Apes, and
Hmm.
there's events that you can get into, and there's clubs and status and everything else. Then they're not talking about the value of Bored Apes increasing, but 98% of everybody else is.
Yeah. Sure.
So like,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
does that go exactly?
Right.
And that's the problem that the SEC's gotta wrestle with. And again, they're not wrong
Hmm.
because for every Bored Ape, there's probably 50 rug pulls.
Yeah. Of course. But I mean, it comes in that mind of like it's like so then so it seems like the answer is being able to offer value beyond it as just a speculative asset, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, primarily, like the
Yeah.
the line, it's, and again, we've never had to have this before.
Hmm.
But the line is what's kind of the real use case. And I almost said primary, but I don't even want to say that because it gives the wrong guidance. I mean, the question really is unfortunately silly subjective, which is what was the person who bought the thing thinking when they bought it from the issuer?
Right. Right. Sure.
And everything else is evidence of that.
Yeah.
So, if I buy, 12 Bored Apes, because they're going to get me into a party, then somebody's going to look at that and go, well, wouldn't one Bored Ape have done it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Exactly.
it's kind of like, it's pretty good evidence that something else is going on.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's where kind of all the platform restrictions on how you sell and distribute things and managing a community and Discord, like all that stuff really matters right now.
Hmm.
Actually, if you're asking for specific stuff, if you are maintaining a Discord channel, a Twitter stream, or anything else like that, you really have got to be on top of managing that community. Because if somebody does sue, if somebody does come to investigate or send a subpoena, the first thing they're going to go to is public statements. What was maintained to the public. It's one
Hmm.
thing if you say it in your white paper, oh, this is all just for the use case, and you go into a conference and go, we're all going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
By the way, that's Ted from Kick, in case
Yeah.
anybody's wondering how that went down. That's kind of obvious. I mean,
Hmm.
it's the SEC has actually specifically said we don't care about your lip service.
Right. Sure.
And they're right. They're right about that. I don't like to demonize the SEC.
Hmm.
Uh, they're in kind of an impossible situation.
Yeah. But I mean, so do you think like so in that case, right? If the ability is to be able to offer like extended value beyond it as just some speculative thing, I mean, so do you think if that's the case, do you think that actually brands and companies are in a better place to offer non-security like actually valid use case stuff because they can leverage all of this stuff they have?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say they're in a better position. And by the way, I don't think we ever said that none of this is legal advice or
Yeah,
investment
no,
advice, but
if,
I'm definitely throwing it out right now, not
yeah,
legal advice.
yeah. I'll
Um,
put a big banner before it like this is
put
not
a
legal
banner up
advice.
there.
Yeah.
The thing about it is, like I was saying, if you're doing something as a capital raise, and I'm going to include the kind of idea of a disguised capital raise where it's like, no, 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 we're just selling our product, but it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're probably going to have to deal with securities laws. And from
Right.
that perspective, you've got more development stage companies in that position of just needing the money and wanting to figure out how to get the money without diluting their equity and everything else. Whereas, if you're any of the existing apparel companies, and I could say Nike, but they're top of the food chain, pick whoever's 50 rungs down from Nike. I have no idea who it is, but
Yeah.
whoever it is. But I'm sure that is still a company that's got at least 8-digit and probably 9-digit revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't need to sell NFTs to raise money.
Right.
At that point, it's a lot easier to design an NFT program that fits kind of the business purpose because you're not really worried about whether somebody's speculating on it to make money. You throw up your disclaimers that say this is not an investment.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's a little bit more to it than that, but in general gist. And you go and you do your thing and you treat it as not an investment. You make sure that if you're running any communities, everybody knows like
Yeah.
some person in like the middle of Nebraska shows up on Discord and says this is a great investment. The moderator comes down and says no, it's not.
No, it's not. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what's happening. So that's important stuff. And again, easier for existing companies.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
existing companies should not be afraid of this. I mean, the world is going this way.
Right.
It's a fait accompli. It's a better technology for a variety of reasons. And yes, we're in early days and things are rough and being figured out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going there.
Right.
And these companies really should be investigating and figuring out how their business models are gonna work.
Yeah, but I mean, so it's interesting too because I mean, so would you? It seems like anything that you did, right? And as soon as you don't make it an infinite supply, like the scarcity driver is going to take over, right? So like, I mean, should you be worried? I mean, yes, you can be like, this is not an investment, whatever. But if the market's like, oh my god, there's only 17 tulips
Yeah,
out there, like we're all going to pay a
yeah,
bunch, like that's not
yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, this is part of the problem the SEC is wrestling with.
right.
The reality is that most business cases require not having an infinite supply,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether something is being viewed as a speculative instrument or not.
Right.
Any artist pre NFT world, creates a run of 2,000,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partially pricing. That's partially all kinds of things. If you want to make runs of 2 million and sell them in college bookstores, you can do that, and that's
Mm-hmm.
ancillary. Great, that's a model. But like the thing behind me right now, it's a limited run, I think 250 or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of what's special about it. That's
Right.
great. Likewise, in the fungible token world, a lot of these business cases absolutely count on some carefully managed tokenomics.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to, because if you look at what the layer one tokens are, they're effectively payment to people for providing compute resources.
Right. Exactly.
That's what it really is. And like any other kind of payment, if you don't have some thought behind managing inflation, deflation expectations and such, it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, and again, another one of the problems, without a third-party liquidity source for people receiving payment for their compute resources to turn their Bitcoin or ETH or Solana or whatever else they're getting for mining into fiat, no groceries, no taxes.
Right.
And it can't be internal. It's got to be third party. Otherwise, the tokenomics just don't work.
Sure.
So, again, it puts everybody in a very difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, the results in the United States for those types of projects has primarily been don't do that in the United States.
Mm.
The
So
country's falling behind because we send our clients overseas.
right, right,
And
right.
it's like, we've got, pick amongst these jurisdictions based on whatever profile, do your initial sale to nobody who's a US person and let that sit there for, a period of time, which is apparently not exactly a 1 year. Thank you, Telegram case.
Uh,
We go from there. But, that cuts North America, and I will include Canada in this because they're kind of similar. It cuts us out of a lot of innovation.
right. Yeah.
And it frustrates people. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll get some more, some more clarity and stuff coming out soon. But Josh, I appreciate you stopping by, man. This was incredibly. I feel like I could just I've got so many other questions that I wanna ask, but I know that your time is not free, so I do very much appreciate you stopping by to at least share this bit with us.
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure, Corey. It's great connecting with you. Really enjoyed our conversations.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. Enjoy the rest of your week. And if you want to let anyone know, I don't know if you're active on any socials or if people want to follow you or connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Shoot me a link, and I can throw it through my LinkedIn and my Twitter. On Twitter, I'm J Lawler Cal. It's actually I'm on J Lawler Cal on Telegram also.
Yeah.
And then my email, which actually is the best way to get me, is jlawler@zuberlawler.com, which is ZUBERLAWER.com. But pretty easy to find.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much again. I very, very much do appreciate it. And I will chat with you again soon, brother.
Very good. Take care, Corey.
See ya. All right.